what would you tell? I'm sure you tell this to your students all the time, but what would you tell someone out there who is the same age you were when you figured out, holy cow, I'm kind of into this whole history thing and, you know, how they used to live? What would you tell someone who thinks, yeah, I want to be an historian? Also, actually, I did hear this. Tell me if I'm right or wrong. There's like the stereotype thing, not stereotype, but there's this thing that I've heard numerous times that you can't really make money with a history degree.
No, I think that's incorrect. I think, like, you know, if you want to go and be like a straight up historian, like a professor, then you're going to run into a lot of challenges and problems because there are very few full-time jobs for that. So that can be precarious. But what I tell my students, when you study history, you've got loads of transferable skills because you learn writing skills, research skills, analytical skills, organization, hitting deadlines, critical analysis, critical thinking.
I didn't think of that.
Loads of things you can translate. This is why lots of people who major in history will often go into fields such as law, journalism. A lot end up going into things like marketing, public relations, because you're studying society. I've known people who study history that went into med school.
You must be a phenomenal researcher.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be a researcher and you have to be able to analyze and interpret. And so these are really, really transferable skills that I think a lot of people don't quite realize. So, people who are like, oh, the humanities won't get you a job. I'm like, well, okay, if you want to be a professor, then you're going to have a hard time. But think about all the things you can do with these specific skills. But you have to work for it. You're not just going to wake up with your degree and be like, give me this job and you'll get it.
Right.
You have to market yourself. You have to network. You have to put yourself out there.
Seems like anyone studying the humanities is studying it maybe and they become a better human with those skills. Not maybe the most employable kind in a specific profession, but any profession, perhaps.
As long as you're interested in a subject and as long as you're passionate about it, ideally, even if you can't do something with it directly, you can find something from it that hopefully you can apply to whatever your current position is.
And let's say you did stick in the history, swimming pool of jobs. What's a typical, you'd work for what, like a newspaper, a magazine, or what would historians do?
So a lot of historians will do a few things, but it does get tricky. And here's the catch. A lot of historians might work for a museum, but nowadays you probably need to get a degree in museum studies or some sort of like a museum master's degree, or at least do a lot of work in museums as you're in college, internships, jobs.
In addition to the history.
Is that like a gate-kept industry?
It's because there's a lot of gatekeeping happening in a lot of industries because of, again, just there's lots of history majors out there and they're kind of finding okay, a lot of people study history and want to work in a museum, but they actually don't know how museums operate. So they're like, okay, let's create a specific field for it. So if you're a historian and you want to go into something very history based, you need to get a certification alongside it. So museum studies, if you want to work in a library or an archive, you should get some sort of certification for that or a degree in that. Teaching as well, if you're going to want to be a teacher, like a lot of historians do, a lot of people who study English as well go into teaching, you're going to need to get a teaching credential.
Fair enough.
You might not always need it for a private school, but you better get either a really high level degree to make them look good, or at least get teaching experience, which you will get if you're going for a PhD because it's kind of a requirement.
So I do have one last question for you as a pirate historian.
Yes.
If you ever felt like you learned enough or too much and you had enough of the piracy in your life, would there be another subject that you would start all over again because you find it deadly
that's a good
interesting?
question. What else are you into?
Even history is fine, just some other era or some other specialty or some other, it was between pirates and the history of plastic or something like this. Right. But what could it be?
I love the classical period, like ancient Greece, like classical Greece and Rome. I minored in classics in college, so I would love to kind of go back and dive deep into kind of learning about classical history, mythology, and the philosophy, because that's another...
More stories.
Yeah, more stories, but I just find the area so interesting because there's so many parallels you can take from there up to today. If I was going to take something completely different, that has nothing to do with history or academics that I would find interesting, I've actually always I'm really interested in cosmetology, such as like being doing hair. I find that to be really
There you go.
interesting, like how people are,
There's some science behind it.
yeah,
and
no,
some
there
art
is
as
like
well.
being like a hairdresser, understanding like, kind of the science behind hair and, people dye their hair, like mixing the right color and how to treat hair well. I have very curly hair and it's difficult to work with really curly hair because a lot of people don't know how to do it. So I've always been very fascinated by it. So like whenever I get my hair done, I'm always like, ooh, what product are you using? Why are you using this? Why are you cutting it this way? Because
You're curious.
I'm genuinely fascinated. So that's something, if I was going to leave academia behind, I would probably like go into that.